So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking a little bit more about this bold new vision for mass transit. I've got a map that you all have included in your packet that detail in spatial form where we would expect to see services in the future. And this is our long-term vision. It's debatable how quickly we might be able to turn this around as we lack funding and various other mechanisms in place to make this happen. But we need something to shoot for. We need something to remind us what we're trying to accomplish in the end as times become challenging with implementation. So I'm going to hone in on a few of these transit services that we would expect by the year 2035. One is the concept of the regional rapid transit corridors, and we see 3 corridors throughout our region that would be viable candidates for rapid transit service. And what I mean by rapid transit service is a light rail transit or a bus rapid transit running pretty much all day long, pretty good frequencies with enough stops to really interact with the surrounding land uses to support economic development. And we have a history with this type of transportation in our past. This is a map showing the old InterUrban Rail system throughout Middle Tennessee, and I've highlighted some of the places that you might have commuted between if you were privileged enough to be able to use the system back then. This is a picture of the old InterUrban Railway car that served between a route between Nashville and Gallatin. And as we look across the country, people are re-energizing their communities with the idea of rapid rail transit now, primarily through the form of light rail transit or bus rapid transit, as it's much more cost feasible to pursue those 2 options than the heavy rail transit that's entirely grade separated from the automobile and other forms of transportation. But as we look across the nation, see what other folks are doing with respect to light rail transit, we see this project in Portland, Oregon. This is a light rail transit in Minneapolis. This is Charlotte's new light rail line that opened within the last couple of years. Austin's recently opened a rapid transit line from the northwest portion of the region into downtown. Another shot of what's happening in Austin. And this isn't just about rail, though. Oftentimes we're going to find that it's more appropriate, more financially feasible, and more, from an engineering standpoint, more practical to implement rapid transit through a bus rapid transit system. And in theory, you know, a bus rapid transit system is giving you the same type of service that a light rail transit service would provide you. It's just on rubber wheels instead of steel wheels. And that allows you to implement your service in phases, whereas light rail transit would require the overhead electrification and the fixed guideway and the tracks to be laid for the entire distance before it opened. Bus rapid transit can be phased in over time, starting with increased passenger amenities or newer buses, following the model that MTA has established along Gallatin Road here in Davidson County. So that's the BRT in Cleveland that just opened, connecting University Circle with downtown in Cleveland. This was a $250 million project that spanned about 9 miles in Cleveland that within a year of opening, the newspaper had estimated had about a $4 billion economic impact on that corridor that had fallen in disrepair. Not solely due to the transit, but largely stimulated by the transit investments that were made there. This is a bus rapid transit and dedicated lane out in Oregon. And bus rapid transit, again, there's this initial lack of appeal that you might find with light rail transit, but if that's a situation to deal with, there's always the opportunity to make your vehicles look like light rail vehicles. Maybe not those colors, though. But what's important about bus rapid transit is that what you're providing people is an option that's above and beyond what you might already be providing. You're making this option attractive to the end customer. So that might mean allowing them to easier access to purchasing fare. Maybe they want to purchase fare before getting on the bus to keep the bus's speeds up to pace with the demand. So that's a look at what's happening across the nation with respect to regional rapid transit corridors. I'm going to hone in on one particular corridor that we've got a major study going on right now. We're looking at light rail transit and bus rapid transit between Gallatin and Nashville on a couple different alignments. I'm going to show you one of the alternatives that we're looking at. This is a view of Indian Lake Village, if you're familiar with that, up in Hendersonville. This is looking south down 386 towards Nashville. Gallatin would be behind me. This is a lot of the vacant land that still exists on the Halo property that is to be developed as part of Indian Lake Village. And in the background, you see the streets at Indian Lake Village already built there. And some more developments occurred since this photograph was taken. But imagine a future where instead of just developing this piece of property in the form of a traditional office park, which you might see there in the middle, and taking some of that land and developing it as a transit-oriented development, you have the opportunity to put bus lanes in the middle of 386 with slip ramps off to the station to support fast movements back and forth between Gallatin and Nashville, servicing Hendersonville, Goodlettsville, and all the communities in between. That rapid transit line would tie into the local system through a local circulator. But this is an example of how we could just kind of redesign some of the things that we're building to support the ridership that would be required to make this investment worth our time. That's inspired in part by what we saw in Denver. Many of you have been to Denver in recent years, particularly with the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce. And this is very similar idea to what was implemented in their T-Rex corridor, which is their I-25 corridor south of town, where they built the light rail and dedicated lanes adjacent to the freeway as they also widened the freeway. So this isn't transit versus roadway. You can do these projects at the same time. But here you see the light rail vehicle operating on the side of the, adjacent to the interstate, servicing these transit-oriented developments that, you know, aren't images of New York City or Chicago or massive densities. They're moderate densities, smartly designed and laid out to produce an environment that is attractive to people that want to live. And as a result, what we see here is not only economic development happening in the suburban areas like this, but as this transit option goes into downtown, it begins to integrate into the local street system and ultimately carries 40 to 50% of all the commuters that go into downtown in the morning on mass transit. Another option that we're pursuing as part of this regional vision is the idea of expanding our commuter rail lines throughout the region. Our vision includes continued support for the East Corridor line out to Lebanon with some frequency improvements over time as development occurs to take advantage of that service, but also a new line that would extend up to Clarksville, connecting Tennessee's 5th largest city with Nashville and all the points in between. Now, there's a big distinction here between commuter rail and light rail and bus rapid transit. It's important that you understand that, I think, if you were to fairly weigh in on what your preference is. Commuter rail is appropriate for lower density types of development as long as you've got a population that's willing to commute into a park and ride and then take that train in longer distances into their work. And so we see that corridor between Clarksville and Nashville, and whether it's on the alignment of the old Tennessee Railway or along I-24, some alternative alignment, I think we see that as a viable alternative to be implemented in the form of a commuter rail service in the future. And we're working very closely with the Clarksville Urbanized Area NPO and the Cheatham Rail Authority and TDOT to study that in more detail. A couple images of our East Corridor commuter rail already in existence. And this is a great picture that illustrates the fact that, you know, these stations built around commuter rail are largely park and ride lots, and that's what we see all across the nation. Occasionally, you begin to see some development that take advantage of that ridership that congregates around the stations, but it's largely a park and ride lot type of system. And this is the kind of movement we're seeing on commuter rail across the region here. And I reviewed some of this information with you last year. This is a picture of Metrolink commuter rail out in California. Notice here it's a heavy vehicle. These commuter trains are typically running on freight corridors, so they're required to be in big, robust vehicles, typically pulled by a diesel-electric locomotive or pushed. This is in Salt Lake City. This is their commuter rail. They've also got light rail service that's distinct from this and are exploring streetcar downtown. This is in Minneapolis, double-decker, very similar to the East Corridor commuter rail service we have in Nashville out to Lebanon. Those cars were purchased from the Metro system in Chicago. And this is out in New Mexico, connecting Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And then the third option for regional corridors that we see as part of our vision for the future is the idea of connecting other places throughout the region with express coach service.